Let's talk about money, seriously, but not the way you're used to hearing about it. We need to go deeper, to peel back the layers on this thing that rules our lives, but that almost none of us truly understand. Because what if I told you that the money in your bank account, the numbers that represent your security, your future, your freedom, what if I told you it isn't real? What if it's all just an entry on a ledger? A story. A story we've all just agreed to believe in. And a story that has a very specific beginning and some very, very powerful offers.
Our journey starts in a pretty unexpected place, a tiny, remote island in the Pacific called Yap. For centuries, the people there had this really strange form of currency, giant, circular stones carved from limestone. They called them rhinestones. Some of these things were heavier than a car, totally immovable. So when someone wanted to buy something, the stone often didn't move an inch. Instead, the entire village would just agree. They'd all agree that the ownership of the stone had changed hands. The value wasn't in the rock itself, it was in the collective memory, this shared mental ledger. But here's where the story gets really weird. The most valuable stone on the entire island was lost in a storm. It sank right to the bottom of the ocean. And you know what? It didn't lose any of its value. Not a bit. Everyone agreed it was still down there. So for generations, people bought and sold things using a ghost, a memory of a stone resting in the silent, dark mud of the ocean floor.
Now, this story about the rhinestones, it's not just some quirky historical fact. It is the absolute key to understanding our modern world. That system isn't primitive. It's a perfect mirror of our own financial system. The value was never, ever in the physical object. It was in the consensus, the shared belief in a ledger. This idea that money is just an abstract agreement about who owns what is the bedrock of our entire global economy. The only real difference is that our ledger isn't held in the minds of a village anymore. Oh no, it's held by a very small, very exclusive group of institutions. And the story of how they seized control of that ledger, well, it doesn't begin on a tropical island. It begins on a private, secluded one just off the coast of Georgia.
If you want to understand the system, you have to go back to its birth. And its birth wasn't some public, democratic process. It was a secret meeting, a conspiracy, really. It was held at an incredibly exclusive millionaires club on a place called Jekyll Island. This is where our modern financial world was cooked up in the shadows, by the very men who stood to gain the most from it.
And just look at how fast this all went down. In 1907, a massive financial panic basically brought the United States to a dead stop. The entire system was saved almost single-handedly by one guy, J.P. Morgan. He literally locked the country's top bankers in his library and refused to let them out until they agreed to bail out the economy. Now, this terrified the elite. They realized their entire fortunes couldn't just depend on the health of one old man. They needed to institutionalize his power. So just 3 years later, they met in secret on Jekyll Island. And a mere 3 years after that, their private plan, the Federal Reserve Act, was passed into law, conveniently signed right before Christmas when most of Congress had already gone home for the holidays. It was a lightning-fast power grab born out of a crisis.
So who were these men who snuck off to Jekyll Island pretending it was a duck hunting trip? Just look at this guest list. This wasn't a group of public servants. This was a cartel. You had Senator Nelson Aldrich, who just happened to be the father-in-law of John D. Rockefeller Jr. You had the heads of the most powerful banks on earth, National City Bank, J.P. Morgan, Bankers Trust, and Kuhn, Loeb & Co., which represented the Rothschild banking dynasty in Europe. These men together represented a concentration of wealth that is just staggering to think about, something like a quarter of the entire world's wealth at the time. They met in total secrecy, even using only their first names so the staff on the train wouldn't know who they were, and their goal, to write a banking bill that would give their private club a government-stamped monopoly over the nation's money.
And don't just take my word for it. They knew exactly what they were doing was a conspiracy. Decades later, one of the men who was there, Frank Vanderlip, he admitted it. He wrote, "We were secretive, indeed furtive." He knew that if the American people ever found out that the titans of Wall Street had literally written their own rules, the bill would be dead on arrival. So they disguised it. They were clever. They didn't call it a central bank. No, they called it the Federal Reserve System, a name that sounds public, decentralized, and trustworthy. But in reality, the ledger had been privatized. A private club was now running the whole show.
So they built the machine. But for decades, that machine still had one important break on it: gold. For a while, the US dollar was still basically a claim check for a real physical thing. But that was about to change. And in understanding how that final connection to reality was severed, we get to the absolute heart of this whole thing, the true, almost unbelievable, and frankly terrifying way that money is actually created in our world.
The date was August 15, 1971. President Nixon gets on television and tells the world that the U.S. is temporarily suspending the ability of other countries to trade in their dollars for gold. That temporary suspension, it's now over 50 years old. And this wasn't just some small policy change. This was a global default. It was the moment the United States government officially announced to the world that our stone was now at the bottom of the sea. From that day on, the dollar was no longer a receipt for gold. It was now a pure fiat currency backed by absolutely nothing but trust in the U.S. government. The final restraint on printing money was gone.
Which brings us to the biggest, most important question of all. It's a question that almost everyone gets wrong. So if it's not backed by gold, and the government doesn't just print all of it, where does the money in our economy, the money in your bank account, where does it actually come from? The answer is so much stranger than you think.
We're all told this simple little story about banking, right? You put your savings in the bank, and then the bank lends that money to someone who needs a loan. It's a nice, simple picture of banks as these responsible middlemen. It's also a complete and utter myth. The reality, and this was confirmed by the Bank of England itself in a bombshell report back in 2014, the reality is that banks create new money digitally out of thin air every single time they approve a loan.
They used to call it fountain pen money, though today it's more like keyboard money. When a bank approves your loan, they don't go check a vault to see if they have the cash. They just type numbers into your account. And in that one instant, two things are created at the exact same time. A loan, which is an asset for the bank, and a deposit in your account, which is brand new money that didn't exist a second ago. Now let that sink in. Nearly all the money in our economy, we're talking like 97% of it, is not created by the government. It's created by private commercial banks every time they say yes to a loan.
Okay, let's make this real. Let's say you go to a bank to get a mortgage for $500,000. The bank runs your credit, they approve you. The loan officer doesn't move that money from somebody else's savings account. No, they simply open a new account for you and type $500,000. And poof, just like that, $500,000 of new money has just been created and injected into the economy. That is a staggering amount of power. Private banks get to decide where new money goes. Do we want a housing bubble? Do we want to fuel a stock market boom? They are the true creators. They are the authors of the ledger.
And this leads us to a really dark and unavoidable consequence. If nearly all money is created when loans are created, well then for the economy to grow, total debt has to constantly increase. Our system doesn't just tolerate debt, it requires it. It feeds on it. And what that does is create a society built on a foundation of debt, a trap that ensnares millions and systematically funnels wealth upwards from the working population to the financial sector.
In this debt trap, it takes a lot of different forms, each one designed for a different part of the population. At the bottom, you've got predatory payday loans, specifically designed to be impossible to pay back, with interest rates that would honestly make a mobster blush. For the middle class trying to get ahead, you have student loans, sold as this great investment in your future, but which for so many become a life sentence of financial servitude. And then, for anyone who has the bad luck to get sick or have an accident, you've got the uniquely cruel American system of medical debt, which is a straight line to bankruptcy and even eviction for millions.
$42 billion. Just look at that number. That's not a company's profit. It's not a government budget. This number, this is the sound of the system breaking. It's the sound of confidence vanishing in a single afternoon.
That $42 billion? That's how much money depositors tried to pull out of Silicon Valley Bank in one day back in March of 2023. Now, this wasn't your grandpa's bank run, with people lined up around the block. No, this was a bank run that happened on smartphones, at the speed of light, and it proved beyond any doubt that the money you think is in your bank account, it's not really there. It's an illusion. It's a fragile layer of confidence, and when that confidence shatters, the whole thing falls apart, revealing that our digital money is really just an unsecured loan that we've given to a bank.
So while most of us are trapped in this system of debt and digital fragility, there is another world, a completely separate world where the rules are just different. For a tiny, tiny elite, the system isn't broken. It's not flawed at all. It is working perfectly, exactly as it was designed, allowing them to hoard unimaginable fortunes while paying almost nothing back into the system. Welcome to the velvet rope economy. Let's just look at the hard data. Thanks to a massive leak of secret IRS files that was published by ProPublica, we can see what they call the true tax rate of the ultra-wealthy. So while a nurse or a firefighter is paying 20, maybe 30% of their income in taxes, someone like Warren Buffett, between 2014 and 2018, saw his wealth grow by over $24 billion and paid a true tax rate of just 0.10%. Jeff Bezos, less than 1%. These numbers are so low they're basically a rounding error. So how on earth is this legal?
The secret is a brilliant, simple, three-step strategy. It's known as buy, borrow, die. Step 1, buy assets that go up in value over time, like stocks or real estate. Step 2, and this is the magic trick, you never, ever sell them. Instead, you just borrow against them. You walk into a bank, use your massive stock portfolio as collateral, and they'll give you millions in cash. And because a loan isn't considered income, you pay zero tax on that money. You get to live your lavish lifestyle on tax-free cash. And then finally, step 3, you die. Under U.S. law, when you die, something called the step-up in basis happens, and all of the capital gains from your entire lifetime are just magically erased. Your kids inherit the fortune, sell a little bit tax-free to pay back the loans, and the cycle starts all over again. It's a perfect, legal, and absolutely infuriating loophole designed to make sure that massive wealth is almost never taxed.
And if you want to see the most insane example of someone gaming this system, just look at this number, $5 billion. That is how much money the tech billionaire Peter Thiel managed to get into a Roth IRA. A Roth IRA, you know, the retirement account that was designed by Congress to help regular people save maybe a few $100,000 tax-free. He used his inside access to pre-IPO shares to turn a tiny contribution of less than $2,000 into a $5 billion completely tax-exempt personal hedge fund.
You know, when you see all this, it's easy to get cynical. It's really easy to feel powerless. The ledger is rigged. The debt trap is real. The tax system is a joke for the super rich. But something is happening. A growing number of people are starting to wake up. They're realizing that the first step to freedom is to simply stop playing their game. They're finding creative ways to exit the system, to take back their financial sovereignty, and to start writing their own ledger.
So how do you fight back? Well, the resistance isn't just one big movement. It's a bunch of different exit strategies. First, you have the psychological exit. This is the quiet rebellion. It's people who just refuse to participate. They live debt-free, they treat credit cards like the trap they are. It's a philosophical choice to uncouple from a culture that's constantly screaming at you to buy things you don't need. Then you have the ascetic exit. This is the FIRE movement, the minimalists, the homesteaders. They understand that the system's power comes from making us want more, so they choose to want less. They're buying back their freedom not with more money, but with less consumption. Third, there's the jurisdictional exit. These are the digital nomads, the people who are turning the entire planet into their own financial chessboard. They use geography as a shield, becoming citizens of the internet more than any one country. And finally, you have the most radical exit of all, the technological exit. This is the attempt to build a whole new system from scratch using technologies like Bitcoin to create a new kind of ledger, one that's decentralized, transparent, and can't be controlled by a small group of men in a secret room. It's a huge bet that the only way to fix the game is to build a brand new one with different rules.
And so we end up right back where we started, with the stone at the bottom of the sea. This entire system, all of it, it's a story. It's a fabric woven from trust and belief. For the last 100 years, that story has been written for us by a very small group of people. And it's a story that was designed from the very beginning to benefit the authors. But the tools to write our own story are finally in our hands. And once you understand how the ledger really works, the last question you have to ask yourself isn't about money. It's about authorship. The ledger is a story. Who is writing yours?